You're listening to the Church Growth Podcast, helping church leaders like you quickly reach more people far from God. Coming to you from the High Five state of Michigan, here's your host of the Church Growth Podcast, best-selling author and founding pastor of Life Church Michigan, Jonathan Herron.
Hello, friends. Welcome to the Church Growth Podcast. Joining me today is a very special guest, author, pastor, speaker, Larry Osborne. Larry, thank you for your time today. Really looking forward to this conversation. For those who don't know who Larry is teaching pastor of North Coast Church in northern San Diego County. And he's widely recognized as being part of one of the most influential and innovative churches in America. Larry speaks extensively on the subjects of leadership, developing healthy ministry teams, and he's authored many, many books, The Contrarian's Guide to Knowing God, The Sticky Church, Sticky Teams. Larry holds an MDiv, D-Min from Talbot Theological Seminary. And Larry, thank you again for your time and joining us on the podcast.
Glad to be with you.
So much has changed since the disruption of the pandemic. We're about to enter into the third year of this disruption. And I've always viewed you as kind of like a Yoda for the American church. Can you give us a sense of what has happened to the American church the past 2 years? Where are we?
Well, I think, first of all, the whole COVID thing has accelerated the move to an online world. Prior to that, most churches were a lot like Macy's with a website trying to drive foot traffic, not like Target or Home Depot or all kinds of other places that are very agnostic. They don't really care or know where the sales take place. They want the transaction to take place. And so a lot of things were just speeded up very quickly. I think a couple other things in terms of where we are that people didn't realize. If you read Romans chapter 1, where it talks about the downward spiral of a culture, most Christians think the bottom of it is sexual decadence, but we hit that back in the 60s. If you actually read the last part of it, verses 28 to 32, I believe it is, it talks about giving over to depraved mind to do every kind of evil. And then it's nothing but relational destruction, envy, strife, gossip, slander. I can go on. There's not a thing in there that's not relational destruction, no mercy, no faithfulness. So we're in a culture, we call it cancel culture. The Bible's been predicting that all along. Cancel culture is simply when a culture hits bottom. And as I said, it's not sexual decadence, it's relational destruction. We all live in echo chambers. And everyone has its own trigger words, its own dictionary. Same words, different dictionaries. And everybody gets upset about everything. And we're puzzled by that, but it's going to show up in the church. The church always is a reflection of the culture. As we turn our life over to Jesus and as we grow and become more like him step by step in obedience, we become different. But that's why you look back in history and shake your head at the blind spots of some Christians. We're all part of the culture we live in. I've often told people, we're like fish in water. You ask the fish, what's the water? They say, well, water, because it's all they've ever known. And so that is shocked lots of leaders because they don't understand why people are so touchy. And I go, well, it's because you think the church bubble is going to be different than the cultural bubble these people are living in, unless you're nothing but a holy huddle of very long-term mature saints. Hey, we're Corinth, we're Ephesus, as a letter is written, we're Laodicea. People tell me, hey, I want a New Testament church. I always go, have you read the New Testament? It was jacked up. And, Paul had to planted these messed up churches, so he had to write all those letters. And that's the world we're living in. And I think a lot of times we don't accept it. Then the other thing is it reminds me of Ezra. We're living in the age of a second temple. And in Ezra 3, where it talks about the foundation being laid, everybody is rejoicing except for the older priests, older Levites, and older family heads who had seen the glory of the first. Well, they hadn't seen the glory of the first with a Shekinah glory. They just saw its bigger foundation and a fancier place. later on Haggai, when they don't finish it, they just lay the foundation and don't finish it. He says, hey, you guys need to go back and finish it. Right now, you're paneling your own houses first. And that's why there's always a hole in your pocket, and less when you go to check on what you think you have. And then he says, the glory of the second is going to be greater than the first. Well, the second still had court of the Gentiles. It still had the curtain for the Holy of Holies. It still had a lot of the same things, but it was completely different. And we often think that, well, we were like on a track. And as we were running on that track, we kind of stumbled with COVID, and now attendance or engagement, whatever it be, is further back. So we just need to get up and run on that same track and get to where we were and then bust on further. But that's not true. The first temple's gone. We're like we're in another planet right now. And the way to move forward is to say, what do I do now? First of all, where am I and what do I do now? As opposed to how do I get back where I was? Because where we were will never come back. And that's one of the great frustrations I find with a lot of leaders right now, is they're still pining for the old days of the first temple, and not embracing the fact that as spiritual Navy SEALs, God has chosen to put us where we are today, has equipped us to do anything we're asked to do. So let's embrace it and go for it.
Wow. That was amazing. I was not expecting that answer. And I really appreciated when you were sharing about cancel culture and about the old generation from Ezra. What would you say to church leaders who are listening in and they feel like a piñata? They've been getting whacked at church, like half of pastors that are 45 and under want to get out of ministry. What would you say? Would you say to them,
well, first of all,
counselor, or what would you say?
Yeah. First of all, I'd say those statistics are bloated. You could ask the question, have you seriously thought of it? And there's an awful lot of people who seriously think about an awful lot of things without doing it. Okay, so, but what gets the news, what gets the clicks, all this, like everybody hates their job or is ready to quit. And yeah, I know plenty that are discouraged, but it's nowhere near the numbers. I don't think that, because again, it's the way the question is phrased when it comes to surveys. But the thing I simply say is, yeah, you feel like a piñata. That's the world we're living in. And so we have to decide whether we're going to live for a past time where there was a little more support, or we're going to embrace the fact that, again, I'm near Camp Pendleton, and special ops, they're scared to death when they're sent behind the lines, but that's everything they volunteered for and trained for, and were triaged to see whether or not they could make it. And I think a lot of times we preach sermons about courage, but we want courage without consequences. So it's like, don't do anything to bring it up on yourself, as Paul says Peter says in First Peter. That's a shame if you bring insult upon yourself. But if you suffer, it means the glory of God is upon you. I think a lot of pastors today need to reread First Peter. I call it standing in the storms, kind of the whole theme of it. Do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal. And we're shocked. And we somehow think our job is harder than other jobs. And I always tell people, we think being a vocational pastor is the hardest job in the world. I go, that just tells me you never had a real job. Life sucks. It's hard. The backside of Hebrews, people were as commended as the front side. So part of it is, I think we just have a lot of us that have a idealistic viewpoint that when we stand up for God, everything works out right. And I'm thinking, like one of the apostles lived to old age and he ended up on the island of Patmos. And we're all discouraged because some people left our church, posted not nice things about us, and our offerings are lower. Oh, wow. That's really tough. Tell that to some of my buddies in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So I almost hate to ask this question then. But the old model was to get Outreach Magazine, look at the Outreach 100. Is that model broken? Well,
it's broken in terms of what attendants told us. I call them flash reports. When talk to some people about leadership. And if a flash report tells you 80% of what you need to know and alerts you to what you need to dive into. So if I owned a restaurant, all I'd want to know every day is gross sales between 6 and 8 p.m. That would tell me whether something changed over a period of time. I'd have a sense of what that means, whether they were high margin dishes, low margin dishes. And attendance, we've always known there's looky-loos and all kinds of things at church, but we'd handled attendance enough to have a sense of discounting and everything to realize it's a leading indicator of what's happening. Okay, it's not the indicator, but it was a leading indicator. Right now, it's a trailing indicator. Because so we're living in a new world where almost all our old metrics are gone. I wasn't one who criticized the Outreach 100. You know, some people always looked at it and go, oh, yeah, some people lied. And, you know, amazingly, really large churches that went through a tough time suddenly didn't report their numbers because they didn't want to go from top 20 to, 87. But there was a great value in it. I remember the first time I saw a church of 10,000 and I went, it was like the 4-minute mile. I didn't know you could do that. And so a lot of it was very encouraging, like, wow, that could be done. I'm not driving, oh, I've got to do it to prove something to myself or other people, but just, I didn't know you could run a 4-minute mile. I mean, I would have never guessed North Coast would get to the size it got until I saw, oh, some other people did it. Who knows? Let's see. But attendance as a primary metric of engagement is totally gone. We have to find some other ones. There are outlier churches and certain states where COVID seemed not to hit, and others where it was life-changing based upon political persuasions and a bunch of other things. But as a whole, there's always going to be a need for the physical presence, but it's going to be smaller because more and more people discovered you actually can learn and grow in a smaller group setting with scripture, change your life. You know, people go, oh, you've got to be present physically. I question, well, then why are you writing your blog? Right? I look in the mirror. I've been changed by things I'm present at, and I've been changed by things I gather through a podcast, through a video, through a book I read. Why else would I write books? So I think bottom line, we just need to embrace it and realize it's a both and world. We got to find a way to minister to people online and get them in community. And we've got to find a way to do the best we can in the large group gathering, which, by the way, I'm a fan of, because it makes come and see evangelism much easier than say, come to my house.
Yeah. So what advice would you give to a listener who's a church leader, not of a, 500 plus church, they're in the 200, 300 range. Would you still say, hey, you've been live streaming your services, keep doing that? Or would you say, hey, shift more towards small group models? What advice would you give?
Well, first of all, the New Testament norm that we don't have once a church hits 200 is the relational transparency that creates all the one another's. And the reason the New Testament church never talked about small groups is they were a small group. There was no mobility. Anybody who's been to the Holy Land, Christian leader or teacher, is always shocked first time they see a synagogue, how small it was. Well, that's because we're so used to mobility. And in the drive, a small church plant of 50 people tells me how close they are. I go, you living together? No. So you're driving to your gathering 3 times a week? Yeah. I go, well, you can do a lot of fixing up between leaving the driveway or your apartment and getting to the gathering. That wasn't possible in the early church. So then the thing we must have is some sense of where we're known and where we can't hide. So that has to be there. So I would tell everybody, you got to create that. That's why North Coast went to a small group centric model at 185, which was about 100. I was a young pastor long ago, far away in another galaxy. And we had like 95 to 110 adults. And I said, oh, we're very close to the core. Everybody else is circling around as an acquaintance, but nobody's really known. So imagine that at 200 or 300. So I think when I say I would, I do tell everybody, You need to make sure the one another's can be lived out one way or the other. And then the second thing that creates discipleship is information. And I love it when you're in the crowd and I can use my teaching gift and all the energies in the room to encourage me along. I love it. But information comes in a lot of ways. And I would say, why in the world would you stop different streams of information? That it's a both and world. And that's what's different. The internet used to be just the yellow pages of your church. Everybody checked out the sermon and stuff first. But now people go there a long time before they go to your church often. Or some people still scared with COVID thing, don't go. Are you going to make them a second-class citizen? What about people that are in club programs? I'm not a big fan of it because I think you teach your kids church is important except for when there's a championship. And then when they go to college, they think they adapt our values, not our boundaries, and don't find a church because it's important except for when you need sleep or to hang with your buddies. But bottom line is I want to be all things to all people like the Apostle Paul. So I'd go, I'm reaching them wherever they are. I want to be incarnational. See, what a Pharisee does is raises a bar and said only those worthy and willing to climb over are worthy to come into our church. And that's why they hated Jesus, because he kept lowering the bar. So I would tell Pastor what Peter says, shepherd the flock among you. Don't use them to reach others and don't worry about who isn't there. Shepherd who you got. And when one wanders off, go pursue them. And little by little, great wealth is made.
How do you think that the past 2 years with COVID and the disruption and, looking at a camera to preach, how has that affected you or your team? Has that been discouraging, encouraging? What's that like?
Yeah, everybody's different. I think we all have an assumption that everybody's just like me or would be if they knew what I knew and experienced what I experienced, as if we're blank slates. That's how we parent, disciple, coach, train. But in reality, we're all fearfully and wonderfully made and different. You could know everything I know and experience everything I experience and still vote different. And so what I would say is that our churches are full of people who experience spiritual growth in completely different ways. I actually learn more when I'm not in the room. Part of it is the leader in me. I notice everything about the room. Oh, gee, why is that air conditioning noisy? If it's here at North Coast, I'm somewhere else. I go, why didn't they fix that? I'm wondering why that gal 3 rows up has to, be rubbing his back like that the whole service. Why don't you just go get a room? Just my mind is pulled away. When Nance and I listen to sermons, which, again, all along, I've always had a teaching team, and now I'm teaching Pastor Kingdom Ambassador here. So that means, except for 20 Sundays, I'm not preaching. When we listen as we drive or online, I get way more out of it. I can stop. I can talk to Nance about it. Hey, what about this and that? But speakers and worship leaders, they love the energy of the room, and they think everybody else does. So my thing is, I think people have all kinds of reactions. Some have loved preaching to a camera. They're hyper introverted. Others have hated every moment of it. It's just all over the map.
Deconstructionism seems to be on the rise, especially with people online more and isolated. I'm just curious what your thoughts are. For example, I ran into someone who I know and love and who I used to be on a staff with, and they've kind of gone on this deconstruction route, and I feel compassion. And at the same time, I go, what happened? I'm just curious what your thoughts might be.
Well, it's always been around. Colossians was written to a group of people who went new agey. Galatians written to people who added to the scripture a legalism. What's interesting to me as I watch today is people talk about postmodern man. And back when I was just beginning ministry, in my 19, I think is when I first started a vocational ministry thing, everybody talked about modern man. But what they say postmodern man won't listen to, they used to say modern man won't listen to. Same stuff. I can just pull books off the shelf and you'd swear it was written a year ago. And deconstruction has always been around, and it always has been the realm of the elite, highly educated, and not the regular person that is in the chairs at most of our churches. So a kid goes away to college who was already predisposed, kind of going to church because the parents made him. A well-educated person, maybe even a pastor, that has a hard time with tension. Either they're very much an artist or very much a black and white thing, and scripture lives with tension. And so they start deconstructing. Or we always have a tendency to change our theology to match those we love, and they start deconstructing. But that's not new, is what I would tell people. It's been around forever, and everybody cried with a panic like the church is going to die. And then next thing you knew, it was the mainline churches that were mostly dying at one point. And out of the blue, a whole Bible teaching movement blew up, and all the young people that couldn't be reached were being reached by an old bald dude. He was 42. I thought he was old, but preaching 10 chapters, verse by verse out of the King James Bible. That just, led to all the contemporary worship we have. Churches that tend to be more expositional. And that's how I look at it today. It's like a Hallmark movie. The first one you see, you think is amazing, but after you've seen a few of them, you go, I know how this is going to end. But nobody knows on the first one,
There's also a lot of critiques of, the evangelical movement. I guess Discovery Plus is going to do a documentary on Hillsong, and there's podcasts and things that take apart churches.
Sure.
Do you think that that's an extra hurdle for church leaders today,
Sure.
or is that something that's been around?
Absolutely. See, that's the downward cycle of a culture that goes into relational destruction. And there is no faithfulness, no mercy, and then it ends. Although they know those who do such things are worthy of death. All of us hate to be the end of no mercy, telling stories from 20, 30 years ago, and all. We hate to be on that. But then it says, and they encourage those who do so. Man, that is a virtual signaling. Even in Christian circles, some of the top podcasts are nothing more than failure porn. And people listen and they say, well, I need to know this. No, you don't need to know that. You're chasing slander and gossip, but you're excusing it because you think you're learning. Either how to be accountable, how not to be a celebrity pastor, how to I look at these. I go, dude, you're not going to be a celebrity pastor. Don't worry. But that's why I call it failure porn. And it's exactly what Romans says. So the church is mirroring the world. MSNBC side went all after the Russian collusion. And I mean, they just couldn't let it go. And they got theirs. Fox side is going all after an election. And I mean, everybody loves to read about all the details, negative details of other people. And the secular world has picked it up. What used to be the Inquirer magazine is now mainline media, left or right. And the church is just swimming in that same cesspool. And we call it investigative reporting and transparency. We would complain today that all the Bible says is David slept with Bathsheba. We'd want to know how many times, what position, all in the name of transparency, so I can be a better Christian. It's like, no, you don't.
Wow.
So I would say, yeah, it's dicier because everybody's doing it. And my advice to the pastors I talk to is, why are you filling your soul with toxic, poisonous gossip and slander about other Christians, but also in the marketplace, the political figures you don't like? Get the big picture detail. Why are you reading all this other salacious stuff? It's failure porn.
I couldn't agree with you more. Oh my goodness. Larry, if I didn't love you before the interview, I'd love you even more now. Last question. You've got an audience of church leaders, church planters. What's the biggest piece of advice or encouragement you could give us heading into this third year of the pandemic?
Well, the encouragement is simply, we're never here by accident. We're here on assignment. And man, so many, especially leaders, we want to do something for God. We go, Lord, use me. And then when he goes and uses us, we go, well, I didn't mean that way. So my encouragement is go back and rethink through your calling. Are you serious, or did you come from some big church where some dude was on a stage speaking and it looked like that would be cool? So I think the encouragement is, let's go back to our calling, and let's go back to our desire to serve Jesus wherever it is he served us. He assigns us, excuse me. That would be my encouragement. And you're gonna get when you look ahead, you never have the grace, mercy, and strength for tomorrow's battle, because it's like manna. It's on that day's doorstep. And so whenever we extrapolate where the culture is going and all that, I'm aware, I see it. I have some concerns, but then I let my theology take over my feelings. And what I know is that if all those things I worry about happen, that very morning, God's grace, strength, and mercy, and even his calling what to do today is going to be right there in the doorstep.
This has been so refreshing. You put into words so many things I've been thinking and feeling, and I'm so thankful for your time today. Thank you. How do we find you online, by the way, if listeners want to find you? How do we find you?
They can go to northcoastchurch.com. And I think there's a Larry Osborne Live, which seems to be dead. It mostly has resources on it. I've got a YouTube channel. Just, they pretty much type my name in and find anything in the books or whatever the sources are, if anybody wants anything else.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for being our guest today. We really appreciate it.
It's a privilege. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to today's episode of the Church Growth Podcast. Discover how our team can help you reach more people far from God by going to www.churchgrowth.network. You can also support this ministry by becoming a patron of the program at patreon.com/Jonathan Herron. That's patreon.com/Jonathan Herron. If today's program was helpful to you, help us reach more listeners by leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcasting platform. That's it for the Church Growth Podcast. We'll see you again next time.